Okay. There's a city being planned right now that doesn't sit on land. It floats on the open water off the coast of South Korea. And the whole point of it is that when the sea rises, the city rises with it. I've spent the last few days going through the actual proposal for this thing, the renderings, the engineering partners, the United Nations documents, and I'll be honest with you, my first reaction was the same one you're probably having right now. A floating city, sure. That sounds like something from a movie, not something anyone is actually going to build. But then I kept reading, and this one is different from most of the fantasy projects I look at, because it has the UN behind it. It has a real city, Busan, that signed up to host it, and it has a serious engineering plan for how the thing actually stays on top of the water without flipping over or falling apart. So let me walk you through it, what it is, how they say they're going to build it piece by piece, what it would actually feel like to live there, and then the part the glossy videos skip. Whether this floating city is ever really going to get built, or whether it stays a beautiful drawing forever. This is Oceanix Busan. And it might be the first real answer to a problem that is coming for hundreds of millions of people. Let me start with the why. Because the why is the whole reason this exists. Right now, something like 40% of the world's population lives near a coast. Cities, the big ones, a huge number of them sit right at the edge of the sea. And the sea is rising. Not in some far-off cartoon future. It's happening now, slowly, a few millimeters a year, but it adds up. Some projections say that by 2050, a lot of major coastal cities are going to be dealing with regular flooding. Land that's dry today will be underwater part of the year. So the world has basically two options. Option one, build walls. Higher and higher seawalls to hold the ocean back. We've done that for centuries. The problem is the ocean is patient, and walls are expensive, and eventually a lot of them lose. Option two, and this is the wild one, stop fighting the water. Build on top of it instead. That's the idea behind Oceanix. Don't hold the sea back, float on it. If the water goes up, your neighborhood goes up with it because your neighborhood is already on the surface, okay? So how do you actually build a city that floats and doesn't just drift off or sink? This is where it gets genuinely clever from an engineering point of view. The first thing to understand is that they're not building one giant raft. A single massive floating slab would be a nightmare. The waves would twist it, it would crack, it would be impossible to repair. Instead, the whole design is modular. It's built out of pieces. The basic building block is a platform shaped like a hexagon, a six-sided floating pad. Each one is a couple of hectares of usable surface. And the reason it's a hexagon is not for looks. Hexagons fit together like a honeycomb. You can clip them edge to edge and grow the city by just adding more of them. Need more housing? Add a platform. Need a school, a park, a market? Add a platform. The city is basically Lego that floats. In the Busan plan, they start with 3 of these platforms connected together. Around 6.5 hectares total, that's roughly 15 acres. Enough in the first phase for about 12,000 people to live, work, and actually have a life on the water. Now, how does a platform float and stay stable? Underneath each one, the plan calls for a base made of a material designed to be ultra-durable in seawater. And the platforms aren't just bobbing freely, they're anchored to the seabed below. So they can rise and fall with the tide, with the waves, even with a storm surge or long-term sea level rise, but they can't float away and they can't drift into each other. They move up and down. They don't move sideways. That's the trick. Vertical freedom, horizontal lock. And here's a detail I really liked. The engineering partners have talked about using something called biorock. The idea is you run a tiny electrical current through structures in the water, and over time, minerals in the seawater actually grow onto them like a reef. The structure gets stronger the longer it sits in the ocean. A building material that heals and thickens itself. Whether they pull that off at scale, we'll see. But the concept, a city whose foundations grow like coral. That's a genuinely beautiful piece of engineering thinking. Let me talk about the buildings, because there's a constraint here most people don't think about. On a floating platform, you can't build a skyscraper. You put a 1,000-foot tower on a floating pad, and it becomes top-heavy, the center of gravity gets too high, and the whole thing wants to tip. So Oceanix is deliberately low. Buildings cap out around 7 stories. Wide, low, spread out, which actually shapes the entire feel of the place. No towers, no canyons of glass, low buildings, terraced, with greenery climbing up the sides. And the city is supposed to feed and power itself as much as possible. This is the part that makes it a city and not just a fancy houseboat. The platforms are designed for rooftop farming and greenhouses, so food gets grown right there. Solar panels on every available surface for power. Systems to collect rainwater and treat and reuse water on site. And because you're literally sitting on the ocean, there are plans for harvesting energy and food from the water around and below you. The goal is a place that doesn't depend on a constant lifeline of supplies from the mainland. It produces a big chunk of what it consumes. So what would it actually feel like to live there? Let me paint the picture they're selling. You wake up and you're surrounded by water, not in a scary way, in a calm way. You walk out and there are no cars, because on a compact set of floating platforms, you don't need them. You walk, or you take a small boat or a ferry between the platforms and back to the mainland. The streets are walkways and the spaces between buildings are full of plants and shade. You can see the farm where some of your food comes from. You can probably see the edge of your neighborhood, the actual edge, where the platform meets the sea, and under your feet, very gently, the whole thing moves. The city breathes with the ocean. When a big wave comes in, your home rides up over it and settles back down. When the tide comes in over the next 30 years and the sea is 1/2 meter higher than it is today, you won't be flooded. You'll just be floating a little higher. The water level relative to your front door never really changes. That's the entire promise. Sea level rise stops being a catastrophe and becomes a non-event. It sounds amazing. And now I have to do the honest part, because this is where I think a lot of these videos quietly lie to you. Here's the truth. As I'm telling you this, Oceanix Busan is not a city full of people. It's a prototype. The plan, the partnership with the UN's Habitat program, the agreement with the city of Busan, the design from a very serious architecture firm, all of that is real. But what they're actually building first is a demonstration. A proof that the idea works at all. 3 platforms. A first step, not a finished metropolis with 12,000 residents living their lives, and the timeline has been a moving target. This was originally talked about as something you'd see take shape in the mid-2020s, and like almost every mega project I cover, the dates have slipped. Building anything on the ocean is hard, slow, and expensive. Salt water destroys things. Storms don't care about your schedule. Financing a first-of-its-kind city is a nightmare, because no bank has ever financed one before, so nobody knows what it really costs until you try. So when you see the rendering with thousands of people and glowing platforms stretching across the bay, understand that what exists right now is a plan and the very beginning of a prototype. I'd put the honest status at this: real project, real partners, early phase, target around 2030 for a working demonstration, and the full vision much further out than that. It's not fake, but it's not finished, and it's not even really started in the way the videos imply. And there's a deeper question that nobody fully has an answer to yet. We have never had humans live their whole lives on a floating city. What happens to these platforms in a genuine typhoon, not a test storm, but the kind of storm that hits that part of the world? What does decades of salt water do to the connections between platforms? What's it like psychologically to raise a family on a surface that's always gently moving? What happens to the people who can't afford to live in the shiny new floating district? Does it become a refuge for everyone or a luxury island for a few? Nobody knows, because it's never been done. It's the first of its kind, or it's nothing. Let me back up for a second though, because I don't want you to think this idea came out of nowhere. Floating on the water is not new. People have been doing versions of it for a very long time. There are whole communities in Southeast Asia that have lived on the water for generations. In the Netherlands, a country that has fought the sea for its entire existence, there are already neighborhoods of floating homes, real houses, that rise and fall with the water level, occupied by real families right now. The Maldives, an entire nation of low islands that could be swallowed by rising seas, is working on its own floating city of hexagonal islands. So the idea of building on the water instead of fighting it has quietly been moving from the fringe toward the mainstream for years. What makes Oceanix different is the ambition and the backing. This isn't one floating house, it's an attempt at a whole, self-sustaining, expandable city. And the people behind it matter, because it tells you how serious it is. The design comes out of a partnership that includes a very well-known architecture firm led by a famous Danish architect, the kind of firm that designs major real buildings around the world, not a group of dreamers. And crucially, it's tied to the United Nations program that focuses on cities and human settlements. When the UN's own habitat people stand on a stage and present a floating city as a serious response to climate change, that's not nothing. That's the global body responsible for thinking about where humans live, saying out loud that this is worth trying. The city of Busan, a major South Korean port, agreed to host the prototype in its waters. So you've got an architecture firm, a UN program, and a real city, all signed onto the same drawing. That's a very different thing from a render somebody made to go viral. Let me go a little deeper on the engineering, because there are details here that genuinely impressed me. Remember I said, the city is supposed to feed and power itself. The plan takes that further than just solar panels and a rooftop garden. The whole thing is designed around what engineers call a closed loop, or a circular system. The idea is that as little as possible leaves the city as waste. Food scraps get composted and feed the farms. Water gets captured, used, cleaned, and used again. And because you're floating on the ocean, you have access to things land cities don't. There's the possibility of farming the water itself, growing seaweed and shellfish in the calm areas between and beneath the platforms, which not only produces food but actually cleans the surrounding water and softens the waves. The ocean stops being just the thing you're floating on and becomes part of the city's food supply and its defense against rough seas. And the modular thing, the honeycomb of hexagons, isn't just about growth, it's about resilience and repair. If one platform has a problem, you can, in theory, disconnect it, tow it somewhere, fix it, and bring it back without the rest of the city even noticing. Compare that to a normal city, where if a building's foundation fails, you've got a permanent, dangerous, hugely expensive problem rooted in the ground. A floating modular city can be rearranged. It can be repaired piece by piece. It can even, in theory, be moved. If a part of the bay becomes unsafe, you could relocate. A city that can pick up and move is a genuinely new idea in human history. There's also a money argument that I think is the strongest case for the whole thing. Building higher and higher seawalls to protect a coastal city is staggeringly expensive, and the walls have to be maintained forever, and if one ever fails, the disaster is total. Some of the biggest coastal cities on Earth are looking at spending tens of billions of dollars just to hold the line against the sea over the coming decades. When you put it next to those numbers, the cost of a floating district that simply rises with the water and never floods starts to look less crazy and more like a rational long-term bet. That's the quiet, serious argument underneath the sci-fi pictures. Here's where I've landed after sitting with this for a few days. I don't think Oceanix Busan is a scam, and I don't think it's science fiction. I think it's a serious, early, honest attempt to answer a problem that is absolutely real and absolutely coming. The sea is rising. Hundreds of millions of people live right where it's rising. Somebody has to try something other than just building taller and taller walls and hoping and floating. Actually floating with the water instead of against it might genuinely be part of the answer. Will the version they finish look like the video? No, it almost never does. Will 12,000 people be living on the water off Busan in a few years? Probably not on that timeline. But will the prototype get built? And will we learn whether a floating city can actually work? I think there's a real chance. And honestly, that first set of hexagons bobbing on the bay, even just 3 of them, would be one of the most important experiments humans have run in a long time. Because if it works, it changes the answer to a question a lot of cities are about to be forced to ask. What do you do when the sea comes for your home? And let me sit on that equity question for one more minute, because it's the one that nags at me the most and the videos never touch it. A brand new, custom-built, sustainable floating district is almost by definition going to be expensive to live in at first. So who actually gets to climb aboard? If these things end up being playgrounds for the wealthy, beautiful escape pods for people who can already afford to be safe, then they've solved the problem for the few who least needed solving. But the people most threatened by rising seas are very often the poorest, the ones living in low, crowded, vulnerable coastal areas with nowhere to go. The whole moral weight of this idea depends on whether floating cities end up protecting those people or just becoming luxury islands floating next to the flooding. The UN's involvement is partly an attempt to keep the project pointed at the people who need it. Whether that survives contact with reality and money is honestly one of the biggest open questions of all, and it's a human one, not an engineering one. Here's one more thing that I think gets lost. Even if Oceanix Busan never grows past its prototype, even if only those first 3 platforms ever get built, it would still be enormously valuable. Because right now, the world is mostly guessing about floating cities. We have computer models and renderings and confident promises. What we don't have is a real one, sitting in a real bay, going through real winters and real storms and real years with real people living on it, generating real data about what works and what breaks. That prototype, even small, would turn a fantasy into an experiment. And experiments are how the impossible slowly becomes ordinary. The first one is never the cheap one or the perfect one. It's the one that teaches everybody who comes after exactly what to do differently. So that's Oceanix Busan. A city that floats, that grows like a honeycomb, that's supposed to rise with the water instead of drowning under it. Real partners, real plan, early days, and a genuinely open question about whether we can pull it off. I'm really curious what you think. If the sea were rising toward your city, would you rather we built walls and fought it? Or would you climb onto something like this and float? Tell me in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.